Hello there, and welcome to the Dreadful Dollhouse. My name is Jazz, and this is a brand new channel where we'll be covering things like true crime, unsolved mysteries, conspiracy theories, scary true stories, and pretty much anything else falling under the same general dark category. If you enjoy that kind of thing and would like to keep being suggested my content, please make sure to like and subscribe. Now that mini spiel is over with, let's get into the video. Today, we're going to be going over the case of Colleen Stan, aka the Girl in the Box. I'd like to quickly go over some trigger warnings just in case there's anything I'm about to talk about that you might not want to listen to right now. In this video, we'll be getting into some pretty heavy topics like torture and captivity, but most of all, there's going to be a lot of mentions of sexual assault. If you do decide to click off of this video, I hope you have a lovely day, and I hope we can see you next time. On May 19, 1977, 20-year-old Colleen Stan was hitchhiking her way from her home in Eugene, Oregon, to a faraway friend's home to surprise her during a birthday party. She made it down to Red Bluff, California, and was on the side of the road waiting for another ride to come along to take her the last 2 or so hours that she had left to go. Knowing the risk of doing such a thing as a young woman, she was being as cautious as she possibly could be while doing such an inherently dangerous thing. She actually declined taking a lift from a couple different drivers, like a group of young men that had stopped to offer her one because of this. She had created her own little criteria of people that she would allow herself to ride along with, people she thought were a bit safer than others. That being said, when a sweet-seeming couple with an 8-month-old infant child in their back seat pulled over to offer her a ride, she decided that this was her opportunity. A young couple with a baby sounded perfectly safe in her mind, so she confidently climbed into the back seat of their van. After a little while, the man, who was also the driver, stopped at a gas station, and Colleen decided it was a good time for a bathroom break. When she got out of the van, she says a little voice in the back of her head told her to get out of there. She didn't know exactly why she was so worried, but she wanted to take the opportunity to, quote, jump out of a window and never look back. Despite this feeling, she calmed herself down and got back into the van. Another 20 or so minutes later, the driver pulled off of the highway with the guise of sightseeing. Specifically, he said that he was interested in exploring some nearby caves. When they stopped, Colleen watched the woman take their infant child down to a lake to play, and suddenly, bam, Colleen felt something cold against her skin. The driver had gotten into the back seat and put a knife to her throat. In what simultaneously felt like seconds and hours, the man tied her up and placed a box over her head. The box that was put over her head ended up being something called a wooden head box, designed to lock on and prevent light, sound, and fresh air from entering. With this, they drove off. This couple's names were Cameron and Janice Hooker, and their intentions were so sick and twisted it's genuinely shocking. Colleen's kidnapping wasn't a stroke of bad luck for her, or a spur-of-the-moment decision for them. Cameron Hooker was a man with certain sexual likings. Ever since he and Janice first started a romantic and sexual relationship, he would act out bondage scenes in the bedroom with her. Well, this in itself isn't so bad. His reasoning behind it, and the fact that Janice completely hated their sex life at this point, pushed them towards making an agreement. This agreement was that Cameron, instead of acting these scenes out with Janice, would find himself a sex slave to act them out with, so long as there was no penetrative sex with the slave. That being said, this part of the agreement was later changed, so that's great. Another part of this agreement was that Janice could have a baby if Cameron could have a sex slave, which is absolutely disgusting and manipulative, but moving on. They decided to go out that day purely for the sake of finding that slave. When they saw Colleen, they thought she was perfect for what they wanted. Starting on the first night of her kidnapping, Colleen went through something terrible. Not only was she terrified for her life and having to process that she might never see her family again, she was immediately brought into the hooker's basement, stripped naked, hung from the rafters by her hands, and repeatedly whipped by Cameron. Once he was satisfied, he blindfolded Colleen and had sex with Janice, his wife, right underneath her suspended body. The fact that she was hanging there, hands numb and painful, just having been whipped for such a long time, and she had to hang there and listen to this disgusting and terrifying couple have sex and get off to her pain is absolutely vile. Poor Colleen would then deal with this exact treatment daily. Cameron would switch in between whipping, burning, beating, and electrocuting Colleen while she was hung from the rafters, have sex with Janice in her presence, and then, when satisfied, chain her up inside of a crate until ready to continue the next day. It was an awful life for Colleen, a life that she was forced to deal with for 7 years. Cameron convinced Colleen that he was a member of an organization he labeled the Company. He told her that other members watched their every move and would not hesitate to kill her or her family if she were to ever attempt to escape. Believing her and her family's lives were in danger, Colleen signed a contract in January of 1978, agreeing to be kept as a slave. Along with not being allowed to leave, the contract stated that she must respond to her new name, Kay, and refer to them as Master and Ma'am. It's so gross to me knowing that they, or at least Cameron, were very, very clearly getting off to every single interaction with her. Poor Colleen, and she was just complying because she was so afraid. For 7 entire years, Colleen was stuck with this horrible life. When the couple decided to up and move to another home, Colleen came along with them. Once in this new home, Colleen was kept underneath the couple's bed in a wooden box built by Cameron for 23 hours a day. Actually, Cameron had a knack for building things meant to torture Colleen. The wooden box she was kept in, the 20-pound wooden head box that she was put into that first day, meant to deprive her of her senses, and a couple of other things, like a stretcher that caused Colleen permanent damage to her back and shoulder. A while after moving into this new home, the couple decided that Colleen was so scared and conditioned into obedience that it would be okay to allow her to be out of the box to do housework, take care of their children, and eventually even go out into the yard without trying to escape or tell anybody about her captivity. Eventually, they even trusted her enough to call her own family on the phone about 2.5 years into her captivity and visit them in person a couple years after that. That being said, Cameron did come with her, posing as her loving boyfriend, just in case she decided to break down and tell them. Though, with his story about the company watching her, he doubted that would happen regardless. Her family was extremely suspicious of the entire situation, but concerned that asking too many questions would push her away from contacting them again, they kept their mouths shut and just enjoyed her company. In 1983, 2 years after visiting her family, the couple decided that Colleen could even be trusted to get herself a part-time job as a cleaner at a local motel. Of course, even with the extra freedom, Colleen was their slave and was still going through extreme torture every single day of her life. Remember that agreement I mentioned earlier when Cameron wasn't allowed to have sex with Colleen? Ends up that he didn't really hold this end of the agreement. He was raping Colleen at least once a month, and Janice found out about this. While she just dealt with it for a while, Janice was growing increasingly jealous of Colleen. She began to resent Colleen, and when Cameron confessed that he wanted to marry her too, Janice snapped. In August of 1984, 7 years into Colleen's captivity, Janice visited Colleen at her part-time job and confessed everything to her. She told her that there was no such thing as the company, and she was completely safe to leave. Colleen immediately took the opportunity to run to a bus station where she called Cameron to tell him that she knew the truth and that she was leaving. Unfortunately, after 7 years of brutal torture and manipulation, she was pushed so far into compliance that she didn't even report this to the police. Thankfully, Janice decided that Cameron shouldn't get off so easily, and in November of the same year, she reported her own husband to the authorities herself for kidnapping and the torture of Colleen. She also told authorities that her husband kidnapped, tortured, and murdered another girl a year prior to the beginning of Colleen's captivity. Unfortunately, they were unable to prove this without a body, and he was never charged with her murder. He was, on the other hand, charged with 8 felony counts of rape, sodomy, kidnapping, and forced oral copulation for the things that he did to Colleen. In exchange for immunity, Janice agreed to testify against her husband and the abuse he inflicted on her over the years of their marriage. Janice had been a victim of Cameron Hooker, too, for their entire relationship, start to finish, and she had been, quote-unquote, okay with the torture he inflicted with Colleen because it gave her abuser another outlet. I'm honestly a bit conflicted about this, as while it's definitely true she was being abused too, I just find it a little gross that the only reason anything ever came of this case is because Janice was jealous of Colleen. Just a little yucky. Anyway, alongside Janice, Colleen also testified against Cameron, recounting years of sustained trauma. The defense tried to use the argument that since Colleen decided to stay and didn't run away, everything should have been considered consensual. Thankfully, the judge literally interrupted this argument and they moved on, as Colleen was clearly not a willing participant of this torture. The defense then tried to claim that Colleen had fallen in love with Cameron and was just a scorned lover, but that all of the sex was completely consensual before she left. The jury, of course, saw right through this, and Cameron Hooker was convicted of 7 out of the 8 counts of kidnapping and rape of Colleen Stan. The judge stated that Cameron Hooker was the, quote, worst psychopath he had ever dealt with, and sentenced him to 104 years in prison with 0 possibility of parole. With that, the case was over. Colleen Stan was finally free to live her life outside of captivity, and the monster was finally behind bars. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you have a lovely day, and I hope we can see you next time.